Ambassador Sarah Chen's footsteps echoed through the crystalline corridor leading to the Galactic Council chamber. Each step sent ripples of light through the transparent walls, a reminder of how alien everything still felt. 1 week into her appointment as humanity's first senior representative, and now this crisis. The massive doors of the crystal chamber parted silently. Inside, the psychic cacophony hit her like a wave. 200 species, all communicating simultaneously through methods humanity could barely comprehend. Neural interfaces flickered, tentacles waved in bioluminescent patterns, and pheromones carried complex diplomatic positions across the chamber. She straightened her midnight blue diplomatic robes, a design that blended traditional Chinese elements with modern Earth diplomatic standards. Her grandmother's jade pendant hung heavy against her chest, a reminder of everything she learned about the power of silence. Ambassador Chen, the Council's ad translator, announced her presence. Humanity's representative to the Galactic Council. The chamber's activity shifted. Hundreds of alien eyes, sensory organs, and scanning appendages turned toward her. She felt the subtle probe of telepathic species testing her mental barriers, their surprise at finding her mind disciplined and quiet. A Mirth diplomat near her wrinkled its sensory membranes, clearly disturbed by her neural emptiness. The council president, a towering Archean with iridescent scales, gestured to her assigned seat. Ambassador, you arrive at a critical moment. The Vexcary delegation has issued their ultimatum regarding the disputed systems. Chen walked to her seat, aware of the whispers, both verbal and telepathic, following her. Humanity's primitive communication methods were a source of both curiosity and derision among the council species. They found it bizarre that humans relied so heavily on verbal speech and body language. The central hologram activated, displaying 3-star systems gleaming in perfect detail. The Vexcary claims were highlighted in aggressive red, their fleet positions marked with pulsing indicators that made the threat clear. The Vexcary demands are non-negotiable. Their ambassador, Anxith, announced. His ceremonial armor clicked as he rose, cybernetic implants gleaming. These systems are crucial to our species' future. We will take them by force if necessary. The chamber erupted in overlapping communications. Neural nets flared with rapid-fire diplomatic exchanges, while bioluminescent species flashed complex counter-proposals. Pheromone-based diplomats released clouds of negotiation markers. The eyes struggled to translate the thousands of simultaneous conversations. Chen remained still, watching. She noted how Anxith's secondary breathing organs fluttered when mentioning the third system, the way his aide flinched, the subtle shift in his stance. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Let them fill your silence with their truth. Ambassador Chen, the council president's voice cut through the chaos. Humanity has been unusually quiet on this matter. Your species' perspective. All attention turned to her again. They expected her to jump into their chaotic exchange, to prove humanity's diplomatic worth. Instead, she stood slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of silence fill her pause. I would like to hear more about the third system, she said simply, her voice clear in the sudden quiet. Why that one, specifically? Anxith's aide twitched noticeably. The Vexcary ambassador's cybernetic eyes narrowed, focusing on her with new intensity. You mock us with such a simple question. The strategic value was obvious. Chen smiled softly, remembering lessons learned at her grandmother's table. The power of the unsaid, the art of leaving space for others to reveal themselves. Perhaps, she replied, but I prefer to understand before I speak. She sat down again, maintaining her silence as the chamber erupted in fresh debate. Several younger species diplomats watched her with growing interest, while others dismissed her response as proof of human diplomatic naivety. But she had seen what she needed to see. The Vexcary delegation's reaction to her question revealed more than hours of their formal declarations. There was something about that third system, something they couldn't or wouldn't say directly. A Tellurian diplomat beside her attempted to initiate neural contact, then sent her a frustrated glance. How do you expect to participate in modern diplomatic discourse without proper neural interfaces? They demanded. Chen touched her grandmother's jade pendant lightly. Sometimes, she replied, the most important diplomatic tool is the ability to listen, really listen, not just to what's being said, but to what isn't. The chamber's cacophony continued around her, but she had already set her course. Let them think her primitive or inexperienced. She would show them that humanity's diplomatic skills hadn't evolved from telepathy or neural enhancement, but from millennia of learning to understand the deepest truths, those left unspoken. The perfect storm was gathering, and she would weather it with silence as her shield. The Council's emergency session entered its third day as reports of Vix-Carry fleet movements dominated the Crystal Chamber's central hologram. Ships moved like predators, circling their prey, each tactical adjustment sending fresh waves of panic through the assembled diplomats. Sarah Chen sat at her station, still and focused, while around her the Council erupted in a storm of neural transmissions and rapid-fire diplomatic exchanges. She watched Anxith's aide, Kex, growing more agitated with each mention of the third system. The Vex-Carry battle groups had begun active scanning of defensive installations. The Military Advisory AG reported. Estimated time to weapons range, 48 standard hours. A new burst of diplomatic activity filled the chamber. Neural nets blazed with desperate proposals, counter-proposals, and threats. The air grew thick with pheromone markers as species attempted to build coalitions. Chen took a slow sip of tea from her ceremonial cup, the scent of jasmine rising above the chemical signatures flooding the chamber. Her silence had become noticeable enough that several younger species diplomats had begun watching her, some even attempting to mimic her stillness. The humans in action is suspicious, a Mirth diplomat broadcast on an open channel. Perhaps they seek to profit from this conflict. Chen set her cup down with deliberate care, letting the small sound draw attention. She caught Kex's eye and held it for a moment before looking away. The aide's chromatic scales flickered with anxiety. Ambassador Chen, Anxith's voice carried a dangerous edge. Your continued silence begins to feel like a form of psychological warfare. Are humans so primitive they can offer nothing to these negotiations? She stood slowly, every movement measured. I have a question about the third system's inner planets, she said, her voice calm in the charged atmosphere. Particularly the fourth moon of the second world. Kex dropped a data crystal, their scales flashing distress patterns. Angstith's cybernetic eyes weird as they focused on her. That information is irrelevant to these proceedings. Is it? She let the question hang in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. The chamber's atmosphere shifted. Other diplomats began accessing data about the specified moon, neural nets lighting up with renewed activity. Hin remained standing, the weight of her silence drawing more attention than any shouted argument. A young Tellurian diplomat, Vexna, approached her station during the brief recess. How do you do it? They asked. Neural interfaces dimmed in a show of respect. Create such impact without broadcasting. Chen smiled softly. When everyone is speaking at once, who can hear the important things? Sometimes silence creates space for truth to emerge on its own. Encarry's teeth. Enxeth suddenly snarled from across the chamber. This human plays games while we stand on the brink of war. His armor clicked as he strode toward her station, cybernetic implants glowing with barely contained rage. The chamber stilled, countless diplomatic protocols activating to prevent violence. Chen didn't move, didn't flinch as the Vex-Carry ambassador loomed over her. Your primitive species cannot comprehend the complexities at stake, he growled. Your silence insults us. Does it? She asked quietly. Or does it make you uncomfortable because it reminds you of something you're not saying? Exith's breathing organs fluttered rapidly. Behind him, Kex had gone completely pale, their scales losing all color. The chamber's AG registered a spike in neural activity as other diplomats processed the exchange. You know nothing, Exeth hissed, but his secondary eyes darted toward the hologram of the third system. Perhaps, Chen acknowledged, touching her grandmother's jade pendant, but I know how to listen. And sometimes, Ambassador, what isn't said speaks louder than any words. The tension held for a moment longer before Anxeth turned sharply away. But something had changed. Several diplomats were now focusing on the third system's data with new interest, neural nets alive with speculation. Vex now leaned closer to Chen's station. "You saw something, didn't you?" And their reactions. Chen sipped her tea, letting her silence answer the question. Around the chamber, she noticed other young diplomats beginning to still their neural broadcasts, watching and listening with new awareness. The council president called the session back to order, but the dynamics had shifted. Ken's silence had become a presence as powerful as any neural broadcast, and the Vexcari delegation's discomfort was increasingly obvious. She thought of her grandmother's lessons in the art of diplomatic silence. Let them reveal themselves, the old woman had taught her. Every truth seeks the light, like a flower turning toward the sun. The crisis was far from over, but Chen had planted the seeds of doubt. In a chamber full of species that communicated through technology and telepathy, she had shown that humanity's primitive methods carried their own power. As the session resumed, she noticed Kex watching her with a mixture of fear and hope. Whatever secret lurked in that third system, it was beginning to strain against its bonds of silence. Chen settled in to wait, ready to let the weight of things unsaid do her work for her. The nickname spread through the Galactic Council like wildfire. The Void. Some species whispered it in fear, others in fascination. Sarah Chen had become known as the black hole in the Council's constant stream of communication, a silent presence that somehow affected everything around it. She stood in the chamber's observation deck, watching the spiral arms of the galaxy turn slowly in the holographic display. Behind her, she could sense the presence of several telepathic species trying to probe her thoughts. Their frustration at encountering her disciplined mental barriers was almost palpable. "Ambassador Chen," a voice called out. She turned to find Mirix, a young Vexcari diplomat, approaching with carefully measured steps. His ceremonial armor was less ornate than Anxith's, marking him as a junior member of their delegation. "The council vote begins in 20 minutes, he said, his cybernetic eyes whirring as they focused on her. "You've made no formal statements on the record." Chen smiled softly. "Does that worry you?" Mirix's secondary breathing organs fluttered, a sign of distress she'd learned to recognize. "There are aspects to this situation that are not widely understood. The third system," she said quietly, watching his reaction. "It holds something precious to your people." The young diplomat's scales shifted color rapidly before he could control them. "You cannot understand. Our history, He stopped, mandibles clicking in agitation. The chamber's AI announced the imminent start of the voting session. Chen touched her grandmother's jade pendant, remembering lessons learned over countless games of Go. Sometimes, the most powerful move was to leave space for your opponent to make their own realizations. The crystal chamber was packed as the vote began. Species communicated in overlapping waves, neural broadcasts, pheromone signals, bioluminescent patterns, and quantum-entangled transmissions. The cacophony of diplomacy was deafening. Anxith took the central podium, his armor gleaming under the chamber's lights. The Vexcari position remains unchanged. These systems are vital to our future. We will not. Point of information. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. The first time she'd formally addressed the full council. The chamber fell silent, thousands of alien eyes and sensory organs turning toward her. "The human speaks," someone whispered, neural nets blazing with sudden interest. "Regarding the third system's fourth moon," she continued calmly, "our historical databases show unusual energy signatures there, dating back approximately 15,000 years, roughly the time period when the Vexcari emerged as a spacefaring species." Exith's mechanical eyes narrowed, but it was Kex's reaction that drew attention. The eight's scales had gone completely white, a sign of extreme shock in their species. "This is irrelevant to the current," Anxath began, but Chen continued as if he hadn't spoken. "The patterns match those associated with ancient Vexcari religious sites," she said, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. "Particularly those from the period of emergence, when your species first embraced its warrior path." The chamber erupted. Neural nets blazed with rapid calculations and historical analyses. Species that communicated through light and color created a storm of signals as they processed this information. "How dare you?" Anxith's voice shook with rage, but the damage was done. Other diplomats were already accessing historical databases, correlating Chen's observation with known facts about Vivskari history. "The human has not made any accusations," the council president noted, scales shifting thoughtfully. "Merely presented historical data. Unless there is some reason this information is particularly sensitive." Chen remained silent again, letting the weight of the moment build. She caught Merrick's eye across the chamber, saw the mixture of fear and relief in his posture. The young diplomat knew that the truth could no longer be contained. Several telepathic species were now focused intently on the Vivskari delegation, their neural nets pulsing with effort. Chen had given them a direction for their probes, and the emotional resonance around the third system was becoming impossible to hide. "A brief recess," Anxith demanded, his usual commanding tone frayed at the edges. "To consult with our government." As the chamber began to clear, Chen felt a familiar presence approach. The Tellurian diplomat, Vexna, had become a regular observer of her methods. "Your silence," they said, neural interfaces dimmed respectfully. "It creates space for truth to emerge naturally. But how did you know where to look?" Chen watched Merrick's hurrying after his superiors, his posture screaming internal conflict. "Humanity had to learn to understand what isn't being said," she replied. "When someone works too hard to look away from something, that's usually where you need to focus." The galaxy turned slowly in the chamber's holographic display, the contested systems glowing like embers in the darkness. Chen touched her grandmother's pendant again, remembering the old woman's words. "The most powerful truth is the one people discover for themselves." The storm she had started with silence was about to break. The only question was whether the Vivskari would bend or shatter. The ancient ritual of the tea ceremony transformed a corner of the crystal chamber into a pocket of earth. Sarah Chen moved with practiced grace, each gesture precise and meaningful as she prepared the implements. The scent of premium oolong tea cut through the chamber's usual mix of alien pheromones and ionic signatures. Selected members of the council watched with varying degrees of confusion and curiosity. Anxith sat rigidly in his ceremonial armor, cybernetic eyes tracking every movement. Beside him, Kex seemed mesmerized by the deliberate placement of each item. "In human tradition," Chen explained softly as she heated the water to the perfect temperature, "the tea ceremony is a moment outside of time, a space where truth can emerge naturally, without force." The Tellurian diplomat, Vexna, had dimmed their neural interfaces out of respect. The silence. "It has purpose here." "Every element has purpose," Chen replied, measuring the leaves with precise movements. The silence, the gestures, the sharing of tea, they create a framework for understanding. She poured the first cup with fluid grace, presenting it to Anxith with a formal bow. The Vivskari ambassador's mechanical eyes whirred as they adjusted focus. "Your species believes wisdom can be found in heated plant water," he asked, but his tone lacked its usual edge. Chen smiled serenely. "We believe wisdom can be found in making space to discover it." She noted how his secondary breathing organs had relaxed slightly, how his aide's scales had shifted to calmer colors. The ceremony continued in measured silence. Chen prepared each cup individually, adapting the service for different alien physiologies. Some species required special implements to consume the tea, others could only appreciate its aroma, but each understood the ritual's significance. As she poured the final cup, alarms blared through the crystal chamber. The central hologram flared to life, showing tactical displays of Vivskari ships engaging Council patrol vessels near the third system. "A minor skirmish," the military advisory eye reported. "No casualties. Warning shots only." The tension in the room spiked. Neural nets blazed with alarm, pheromone markers shifted to threat patterns, and bioluminescent species flashed warning colors. But Chen continued pouring the tea as if nothing had happened. "Ambassador," Anxith's voice was tight with strain, "your ceremony seems pointless now." "Does it?" Chen set the teapot down with perfect precision. Or is this exactly when we need space to consider our next moves carefully? She lifted her own cup, inhaling the aroma with appreciation. The other diplomats watched as she took a small sip, her movements a study in controlled grace. Your species values strength, she observed quietly, the warrior's path. Tell me, Ambassador, is it stronger to claim something through force, or to be strong enough to speak truth? Anxeth's mechanical eyes fixed on her, but his secondary breathing organs betrayed his inner conflict. Kex had gone completely still, scales shifted to a deep shade of midnight blue, a color Chen had never seen in their species before. You know something, Anxeth said finally, about the third system, about why we. He trailed off, mandibles clicking in agitation. Chen set her cup down with a soft click that somehow carried through the tense atmosphere. I know that great warriors throughout human history often found their greatest strength in knowing when not to fight. The council president's scales rippled with interest. The human speaks wisdom. Perhaps. Another alarm cut through the chamber. More ships moving into position. The galaxy's peace balanced on a knife's edge, and Chen had gambled everything on this moment. She began cleaning the tea implements with the same careful precision she used in preparing them. Each movement another lesson in patience, in the power of calculated silence. There is no shame, she said softly, focusing on drying a delicate cup, in honoring one's origins. Even warriors must remember where they came from. Anxeth's armor clicked as he shifted position. For the first time, she saw his peripheral eyes close, a sign of deep thought in his species. Perhaps, he said finally, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, there are some discussions that should happen differently. Chen inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the moment without drawing attention to it. Around them, the other diplomats watched in fascination as something shifted in the political winds. The tea ceremony ended as it had begun, in measured silence. But now that silence carried possibility instead of tension. As the diplomats filed out, Vexna lingered. I begin to understand, they said, neural interfaces glowing softly. Your silence is not empty. It is full of meaning. Chen arranged the last implement in its proper place, each movement a continuation of the ceremony's lessons. Sometimes, she replied, the greatest wisdom lies in creating space for others to find their own path to truth. The galactic core glowed in the chamber's holographic display, a reminder of the vastness of space and the delicate threads of diplomacy that held civilization together. Chen touched her grandmother's jade pendant, thankful once again for lessons learned in quiet moments over tea. The Go board sat between them like a battlefield in miniature, its grid pattern stark against the crystal chamber's ethereal architecture. Sarah Chen placed a black stone with practiced grace, the soft click echoing in the tense silence. Billions across the galaxy watched through neural feeds as humanity's ambassador faced the Vexkari in this ancient game of territory and influence. You challenge me to a primitive tactical simulation. Anxeth had sneered when she first proposed the match. Now, 3 hours in, his cybernetic eyes whirred continuously as they analyzed the complex patterns emerging on the board. Go is not about destruction, Chen explained, her voice carrying to the assembled diplomats and the countless beings watching the broadcast. It's about influence, territory, and the balance between aggression and restraint. Anxeth placed his white stone, mandibles clicking in concentration. The move was aggressive, threatening to cut off a significant portion of Chen's territory. Around them, neural nets blazed as species ran tactical analyses of the game state. Chen sat back slightly, appearing to contemplate the board. In reality, she was watching Kex's reaction to certain moves, particularly when play approached the corner that, in her mind, represented the third system's position. Your strategy is unusual, Anxeth observed, secondary breathing organs fluttering. You leave key positions seemingly undefended. Do I? Chen placed another stone, its click perfectly timed. Or do I trust in the strength of my overall position? The game continued, a dance of black and white stones across the grid. Chen played with the style her grandmother had taught her, patient, subtle, focused more on influence than territory. Several younger diplomats had gathered closer, their neural interfaces dimmed to better focus on the physical game. Suddenly, emergency lights flashed. The military advisory eye's voice cut through the chamber. Encrypted military transmissions detected near the third system. Multiple Fs carried battle groups adjusting formation. Chen didn't look up from the board. She placed her stone with the same measured grace, the click drawing attention back to the game. After a moment's hesitation, Anxith returned his focus to their match. "You ignore a military alert to place a game piece?" he asked, mandibles twitching. "This game," Chen replied softly, "is teaching us more than any military maneuver." She gestured to a complex pattern forming in the center. "See how these stones support each other? None is strong alone, but together they create something greater." Anxith's cybernetic eyes focused on the pattern. Behind him, Kex's scales had shifted to a deep purple, a color Chen had come to associate with recognition or revelation in their species. "You believe this pattern holds some lesson for our current situation?" Anxith asked, placing his next stone with less certainty than before. Chen responded with a move that seemed to withdraw from conflict in one area while strengthening her position in another. In Go, the strongest player isn't always the one who takes the most territory. Sometimes strength lies in knowing which battles not to fight. The game progressed, each move carrying weight beyond the simple placing of stones. Chen played with deliberate patience, leaving spaces that invited her opponent to reveal his true intentions. The watching diplomats began to understand. This wasn't just a game, but a complex diplomatic exchange conducted in silence and strategy. "Your stone's near this corner," Anxith observed, mechanical eyes focusing on a particular formation. "They protect something of seemingly little value." "Value," Chen replied, placing another stone with perfect timing, "is not always obvious at first glance. Sometimes what appears worthless to one player holds deep significance to another." The implications hung in the air. Several telepathic species broadcast sudden understanding, their neural nets lighting up with new analytical patterns. Kex had gone completely still, scales shifted to that midnight blue shade that suggested deep emotional resonance. "A warrior," Chen continued softly, "must choose not only how to fight, but what to fight for." She placed her next stone, completing a pattern that subtly reflected the stellar arrangement of the disputed systems. Anxith's peripheral eyes widened slightly, the first time she'd seen him show genuine surprise. His next move was hesitant, almost defensive. "Perhaps," he said finally, "there are some battles where victory lies in understanding rather than conquest." The game continued, but something had shifted. Each move now carried undertones of diplomatic possibility rather than military threat. The watching diplomats began to understand that they were witnessing more than a match. They were seeing the art of war transformed into the art of peace. As Chen placed her final stone, completing a pattern that protected both players' essential territories while sharing the contested spaces, she saw understanding dawn in Anxith's cybernetic eyes. "You have shown us," he said quietly, "that there are many forms of strength." The game ended not in total victory for either side, but in a balance that preserved what mattered most to both. As the diplomats filed out, Chen began carefully putting away the stones, each movement a lesson in the power of patience and strategic silence. The galaxy turned slowly in the chamber's holographic display, the contested systems glowing like stars in the darkness. Sometimes, she reflected, the greatest victories came not from the stones you played, but from the spaces you left for others to fill. The revelation came not with a bang, but with a whisper. In a private chamber off the main council hall, Mirix, the young Vex-carried diplomat, stood before Sarah Chen with trembling mandibles and fluctuating scales. His ceremonial armor seemed too large for him in this moment of vulnerability. "The third system," he began, voice barely audible. "We call it Ixthar, the cradle." His secondary breathing organs fluttered rapidly. "It is where we first learned to reach for the stars." Chen sat quietly, letting the weight of history fill the space between them. Through the chamber's crystalline walls, the distant light of the disputed system sparkled like a beacon. "Our ancestors," Mirix continued, each word seeming to cost him physical effort, They were not the warriors we became. They were seekers, philosophers. The fourth moon still holds the temples where they first contemplated the cosmos. Your species' birth world, Chen said softly, understanding dawning, not just a strategic asset. We abandoned it during the Great Transformation. Mirix's scales shifted to deep indigo. Shame, Chen had learned. When we embraced the warrior's path, we saw our origins as weakness, left our cradle behind to prove our strength. The chamber's ag registered a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure as Nixeth entered, his heavy armor clicking against the crystal floor. But instead of the rage Chen expected, she saw something different in his cybernetic eyes. Resignation, perhaps even relief. The aide speaks truth, Nixeth said, his usual commanding tone subdued. Our warriors' hearts burn to reclaim Ixtar, but our warriors' pride forbids us from admitting why. His peripheral eyes closed. How can we tell the galaxy that the mighty Vexcari wish to reclaim temples of peace and contemplation? Chen touched her grandmother's jade pendant, remembering lessons about honor and face. Your culture values strength above all, she observed, but perhaps there are different kinds of strength. The council would mock us. Kex spoke up from the doorway, scales rippling with anxiety. The great warrior species revealed to have begun as peaceful philosophers. Our enemies would see weakness. Would they? Chen asked, her voice carrying quiet authority. Is it not strength to know your true self? To honor your origins while celebrating what you've become? The chamber fell silent as her words sank in. Outside, the council chamber hummed with neural transmissions and diplomatic chatter, species debating the military standoff that seemed to inch closer to war with each passing moment. Our current path, Chen continued carefully, leads to destruction, not just of lives and ships, but perhaps of these temples themselves. Would true warriors risk destroying their own heritage? Nixeth's armor creaked as he shifted position. You understand, then, why we could not simply explain, why we chose aggression instead of. He trailed off, mandibles clicking in frustration. Instead of revealing a truth you thought would shame you, Chen finished gently. In human history, many great warrior cultures faced similar challenges. The strongest among them learned to bridge their past and present, finding power in their complete identity. Mirix's scales had begun shifting to new colors, patterns Chen hadn't seen before. But how? How can we maintain our warrior's honor while admitting this need? Chen stood slowly, her diplomatic robes rustling in the quiet chamber. Sometimes the greatest battle is not against an enemy, but against our own fears. She moved to the window, watching the galactic core shimmer. Your species did not abandon strength when you became warriors. You added to what you already were. The three Vexcari exchanged glances, their subtle movements speaking volumes in their own cultural language. Chen waited, letting them process the implications. If, Nixeth said finally, his voice carrying the weight of possibility, if there were a way to reclaim Ixtar that honored both our warrior present and our seeker past, then perhaps, Chen replied, we could find a solution that brings genuine victory, not through conquest, but through understanding. The chamber's lights dimmed slightly as a priority message flashed through the council's networks. More ships moving into position, time running out for diplomatic solutions. But in this quiet room, something had shifted. The truth, once spoken, could not be unheard. Chen watched the play of emotions across alien faces and knew that the real battle, the one for understanding, was finally being fought. Your silence, Nixeth said suddenly. It gave us space to find our voice. His cybernetic eyes focused on her with new appreciation. Perhaps there is wisdom in your primitive methods after all. Chen smiled softly, touching her pendant once more. Sometimes the greatest diplomatic victories came not from speaking truth, but from creating space for truth to emerge on its own. The crystal chamber had never been so still. Sarah Chen stood at the central podium, her midnight blue diplomatic robes catching the light from 1,000 distant stars. The assembled representatives of 200 species waited, neural nets dimmed, communication arrays quiet, all attention focused on the human diplomat who had transformed silence into strength. "Honorable representatives," she began, her voice carrying the measured tone her grandmother had taught her, "I present a proposal not of compromise, but of understanding." The holographic display shifted, showing the contested systems in intricate detail. The third system, Ixthar, glowed with special prominence. "The Vex carry claim to these systems," she continued, "comes not from aggression, but from a deeper truth." She paused, letting the weight of the moment build. "They seek not conquest, but return." Inksith stood at his station, his ceremonial armor gleaming. For the first time, Chen noticed subtle engravings on its surface, ancient symbols that looked more philosophical than martial. "The third system, Ixthar, is not merely a strategic asset," Chen revealed, each word carefully chosen. "It is the cradle of Vivifskari civilization, the birth world of a species that began not as warriors, but as seekers of wisdom." The chamber erupted in neural chatter, but Chen held up a hand, commanding silence with her presence alone. The noise subsided. "I propose that we recognize Ixthar not as conquered territory, but as a sacred trust. The Vivifskari would return not as conquerors, but as warrior guardians of their own heritage." The holographic display shifted again, showing the ancient temples on the fourth moon. The architecture spoke of contemplation and cosmic harmony rather than military might. "A warrior's greatest strength," she continued, watching Nexith's reaction carefully, "lies not in denying their past, but in embracing their complete identity. The Vivifskari have evolved from seekers to warriors. Now they can be both." The chamber remained silent, but the neural nets blazed with rapid analysis. Species that communicated through light and color created subtle patterns of consideration and interest. Under this proposal, the Vivifskari would serve as protectors of Ixthar, maintaining both their warriors' honor and their philosophical heritage. The temples would be preserved as a testament to their species' journey. The other systems would remain under council jurisdiction, with guaranteed Vivifskari access for cultural ceremonies. She paused again, feeling the shift in the diplomatic winds. Engst's peripheral eyes had closed, a sign of deep contemplation. "This is not surrender," she emphasized, her voice carrying new strength. "This is elevation. The Vivifskari would take on a role no other species can fill, guardians of their own origin point, warriors who protect wisdom rather than conquest it." Kex's scales had shifted to brilliant colors Chen had never seen before. Around the chamber, other diplomats were beginning to understand the elegance of the solution. "The council would recognize Vivifskari sovereignty over Ixthar," Chen continued, "not as a concession to force, but as an acknowledgement of their unique cultural claim. In return, the Vivifskari would share their historical knowledge, allowing the galaxy to learn from their journey from seekers to warriors." She turned to face Enkzeth directly. "Your species has long been known for its strength in battle. Now you can show an even greater strength, the power to bridge past and present, to be both sword and shield for your own heritage." The chamber held its breath. Enkzeth stood perfectly still, his cybernetic eyes whirring as they processed the proposal. Finally, he stepped forward. "The human speaks." He began, then paused, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "The human speaks wisdom. We are warriors, yes, but perhaps it is time we remembered what we fought to become warriors for." The tension in the chamber began to dissolve. Neural nets lit up with approval, pheromone markers shifted to patterns of agreement, and bioluminescent species glowed with colors of harmony. Chen touched her grandmother's jade pendant, remembering lessons about the power of silence, of leaving space for others to find their way to truth. "Sometimes," she said softly, though her voice carried to every corner of the chamber, "the greatest victory comes not from proving strength, but from showing wisdom." The council president rose, scales shimmering with approval. "The proposal will be formally recorded. Does any species wish to speak against it?" The silence that followed was not empty, but full of possibility. In that moment, Chen realized that humanity's primitive communication methods had achieved what countless neural broadcasts and telepathic exchanges could not. They had created space for understanding to grow naturally. The galaxy turned slowly in the holographic display, its light reflecting off armor and scales, crystalline surfaces, and neural interfaces. In the end, it was not words that had won the day, but the careful cultivation of silence, a human art that had proven as powerful as any advanced technology. 1 year later, the meditation garden in the Galactic Council's diplomatic wing had been transformed. Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on a traditional cushion, surrounded by a diverse group of students, both human and alien. The scent of jasmine tea drifted through the air, mixing with the exotic perfumes of a dozen species. The art of diplomatic silence, she explained, watching her students' reactions, is not about being quiet. It's about creating space for truth to emerge. Vexna, the Tellurian diplomat, who had become one of her most dedicated students, had dimmed their neural interfaces completely, a practice that had become known as human quiet among council species. But how do we know when silence will be more effective than communication? Asked a young Mirth diplomat, their sensory membranes rippling with curiosity. Chen smiled, pouring tea with the same measured grace she had shown during the Vexcary crisis. Watch, she instructed, serving each student according to their physiological needs. The garden's holographic sky simulated a sunset, casting warm light across the assembled diplomats. In the distance, the spires of the council complex glittered, and beyond them, the stars beckoned. Observe how each of you responds to the tea ceremony, she continued. Some focus on the aroma, others on the movements, still others on the shifting patterns of light on the liquid's surface. In silence, you each find your own path to understanding. A junior Vexcary diplomat, part of their newly established cultural exchange program, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. His ceremonial armor bore both warrior marks and philosophical inscriptions, a new tradition that had emerged since the Ixthar Resolution. The temples on the fourth moon, he said quietly, they teach similar principles. Our ancestors understood the power of contemplative space. Chen nodded, acknowledging the connection. The resolution of the Vexcary crisis had sparked a quiet revolution in galactic diplomacy. The Council had created a new diplomatic classification, Silent Mediator, a role that focused on creating space for understanding rather than forcing solutions. Your species, she addressed the Vexcary diplomat, has shown the galaxy something remarkable, that strength can lie in embracing complexity rather than denying it. The garden's peace was briefly interrupted by a cascade of neural transmissions as a group of technologically enhanced species passed nearby. Ken's students remained still, practicing the art of maintaining inner quiet amid external chaos. The galaxy is changing, Vexna observed, their natural voice carrying unusual warmth. More species are discovering the value of, what do humans call it? Mindfulness. Each culture finds its own way, Chen replied, touching her grandmother's jade pendant, now a symbol recognized throughout the council. The key is not to replicate human methods, but to discover how silence can serve your own diplomatic traditions. A soft chime indicated the arrival of first speaker Exith, his presence no longer intimidating but respected. His cybernetic eyes had been modified to include contemplative focusing protocols, another innovation born from the merging of Vexcary warrior and seeker traditions. Ambassador Chen, he greeted her, mandibles clicking in the new pattern that indicated respect for silence. The council requests your presence. Another situation has arisen that might benefit from human perspective. Chen rose smoothly, her diplomatic robes rustling softly. Every crisis, she told her students, is an opportunity to create space for understanding. As she followed Exith, she heard her students beginning their own discussions, blending traditional council communication methods with periods of purposeful silence. The quiet revolution continued to spread, transforming galactic diplomacy one thoughtful pause at a time. In the main council chamber, the holographic display showed new systems, new challenges, new opportunities for understanding. Ken touched her pendant one last time, grateful for her grandmother's wisdom. The greatest power, the old woman had taught her, lies not in filling silence, but in letting silence fill others with understanding. The stars turned slowly in their eternal dance, watched by countless species learning to appreciate the power of a quiet moment. In the end, Humanity's greatest diplomatic weapon had not been technology or force or even words. It had been the simple, profound art of knowing when to let silence speak. Around the council complex, more meditation gardens were being planted, more quiet spaces created. Species that had once seen human communication methods as primitive now sent their diplomats to Earth to study the art of silence. And in the garden behind her, Chen could hear the future of galactic diplomacy taking root in the soft clink of teacups and thoughtful pauses between words, in the growing understanding that sometimes the most powerful message is the one left unsaid.